Hi everyone, it's Sheryl Gottschall here from UFO Research Queensland. This is going to be a re-recording of something that I presented at one of our meetings a couple of months ago, which was an online meeting, and the recording didn't work properly for some reason, it failed. So I'm re-recording this for our YouTube channel, and I hope you enjoy it. So what I'm talking about today is alien dreams and apocalyptic nightmares. And close encounter witness reports, witnesses have reported many after effects from their alien interactions. And one of the intriguing phenomena, but I think least investigated, and maybe it's because we don't know how to investigate it, but is their strange dreams following their experiences. And some of the dreams reported are apocalyptic in nature and showing terrible scenes of the future and impacting everyone on the planet. In some situations, some people have told me that they feel that they have a role to play when those particular things happen. But the question is, why do witnesses have these dreams? And could they be a manifestation of their own deeper anxieties, possibly brought on by their experiences? Or could they actually be warnings of things to come in this perilous time in our history? So I'm just going to share the screen here because I've got a couple of slides. I'm going to show. Here we go. Okay. So during the I'm going to show you a slide with some of our statistics which I put together. But I stopped doing it after a while because it was just, it's a bit of a job. Keeping a track of all these. But you can see here statistics that our organisations received over the years in a 10-year period. So down here we've got 3 that year, 7 that year, 269, 125, 186. But here, during the late 80s and into the mid-90s, there were 3,157 reports received. And the following year, during the mid-90s till mid-2000s, we had 1,325 reports. And probably since, and in that time, since the last time I recorded the reports in 2009, reports have consistently dropped. And, that could be for all sorts of reasons. But in that time period of the 1990s where we were receiving alien abduction reports, so were many UFO organisations and independent researchers around the world were receiving similar numbers. And quite a lot of those reports included people who had alien abduction experiences. And but within their experiences, there were other things that were entwined in their lives, including a wide variety of paranormal experiences, missing time events, and strange dreams. And some reported having memories of being taken to locations underground. I remember receiving many reports like that. And sometimes they'd be in an enclosure, or they'd be in some type of enclosure, in a spaceship maybe. And in those situations, they would be shown different world scenarios playing out, and things like earthquakes and tsunamis and floods, nuclear explosions and the like, they were commonly reported. And others would report that in the aftermath of their close encounters, they would have end of world and disaster dreams that were deeply disturbing and unsettling them for months. Now, I don't think this has gone away. People still report those types of things. And I've seen some people talking about that, not particularly being reported to our organisation, but certainly people on the internet talking about it. But at the time that people were reporting these things, those dreams weren't really being paid attention to by researchers, at least not enough. So that, UFO researchers sort of would keep an ear or an eye out for those sorts of things. And that included myself as well. But since then, I've had cause to think that, rethink the dream reports of experiences, and I'm wondering what they might be about. So I'm just going to go. Now, what put me onto, what brought this to my mind was recently I watched the UFO Witness series, and the narrator and host in that was Ben Hansen, US researcher. And I believe Ben has a background as an FBI, ex-FBI agent. Anyway, in that particular show, he talked about, well, actually it was episode 1. He explored the now well-known USS Nimitz encounter with the Tic Tac shaped UFO. Now, this incident took place on November 20, 2004, when the USS Nimitz was 160 kilometres off the coast of San Diego on a routine naval training exercise. And it was the USS Nimitz Carrier Strike Group, which included the nuclear-powered carrier and the missile cruiser USS Princeton, and they were conducting a series of drills prior to deployment in the Persian Gulf. So in a carrier strike group, there's about 7,500 personnel, okay, on an aircraft carrier and a cruiser and a destroyer squadron of at least 2 destroyers or frigates, and a carrier air wing of 65 to 70 aircraft. So there were a lot of people around. Like, that's the point, really, okay. But at the time, and you would know this man, this was Commander David Fravor, who was one of the pilots who saw this object or objects, and obviously many of you have heard him speak about that. But at the time, Kevin Day was the senior radar operator on the USS Princeton, here he is, and was on watch as the anti-warfare coordinator. And his radar picked up strange objects off Catalina Island that seemed to ping-pong through the sky while changing speeds. Now, by then, the Pentagon's highly advanced radar had been picking up mysterious objects for several days. And as we know, the Navy calls these objects anomalous aerial vehicles, or AAVs, a term the military prefers to use is UAP, but unfortunately they don't use UFOs, which I think actually diffuses and confuses the whole situation. But anyway, that's another story. According to Kevin Day, his screen showed well over 100 AAVs over the course of the week. And he said watching them on the display was like watching snowfall from the sky. A lot. So he approached the Princeton's commander about taking action, which actually happened, and 2 fighters were diverted to intercept one of the strange objects, one piloted by Commander David Fravor, who was already in the air. And when they first arrived on the scene, the pilots didn't see any flying objects, but they did observe what the lead pilot, Commander Fravor, later referred to as a disturbance in the ocean. And I'm getting to my point, so hang in there. The water was churning with white waves breaking over what looked like a large object under the surface. Then they noticed one of the objects flying about 50 feet above the water. And Fravor, the commander of the elite Black Aces squadron, who, by the way, was a Top Gun program graduate with more than 16 years of flying experience, described the object as about 40 feet long, shaped like a Tic Tac candy, that had swift, erratic movements like a ping pong ball against the wall. And as Fravor flew around it, he says the craft ascended and came right at his plane. And all of a sudden it kind of turns and rapidly accelerates into the distance. So now here's where it gets interesting, and to my point. Soon after the incident, people with top secret clearance came on board and collected voice data, radar traffic and radar readings, everything to do with the UFO incident. Now, Kevin Day said his captain was disinterested and his fellow workers didn't want to talk about it, as if that wasn't intriguing enough, though. Soon after the incident, Kevin Day began having apocalyptic end-of-world dreams consisting of tsunamis, earthquakes, forest fires, tidal waves, floods, etc., etc. And those dreams left him with the feeling that, and I quote, "We need to prepare for what's coming." Now, what that means, have no clue, but I found that very interesting. So the next case I want to talk about is Susie Hansen, who's a good friend of mine over in New Zealand. She's a researcher and an author and an experiencer, someone who's had close encounter experiences since she was, well, actually going back quite a while. And her experiences began in childhood, the ones with recurring dreams. And although Susie describes them as dreams, she feels they are real memories. And as a child, Susie says she would dream she was with a group of 3 pale, indistinct beings in a white-walled room. And here she was told she was learning to help other people, and it was a great responsibility not to be taken lightly. In the dream, she was asked to envisage a scene and concentrate. And the situations in her dream were different each time, usually entailing Susie helping others affected by a condition, problem, or series of events, or a tragic situation, with accompanying guidance from the group of beings that were there at the time. Now, on one occasion, the being showed Susie the tragedies of armed conflict and war and greed between humans. And on one particular occasion, Susie found herself in an out-of-body state, flying through the air above a foreign landscape where 2 groups were engaged in armed conflict. And she states that most of her dream memories revolve around urgent or stressful situations and problem solving. Now, that's something that I have heard from other people as well who'd been in those situations. This is where the idea of them feeling that they have to play a part in solving those situations and to support humanity, humans who are involved in those situations too. So on another occasion, Susie was shown the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945, and they were 2 occasions when mankind used nuclear weapons in warfare, causing massive destruction, loss of life, and ongoing suffering. Now, we know, those of us who've been in UFO research for quite some time, but even if you're entering, you've probably heard about the idea that extraterrestrials visited Earth, particularly in the 50s and 60s, and gave warnings about our nuclear activity to stop exploding bombs, etc., because it wasn't just creating a problem on this planet. We had no idea how it was affecting, the effects were going beyond planet Earth. Anyway, Susie was also shown the Earth's magnetic field exploding outwards, reverberating through our solar system and into the galaxy. And she says that she was told this must never happen again because of the dangerous effects to all life on Earth, as well as in the unseen realms, and that the Greys have been influencing some people, quote, to steer our civilization in another direction towards making better choices. Now, Susie also states that the Greys use consciousness technology to sweep or scan whole cities and communities and towns and villages even, to detect specific energetic frequencies emitted by people to determine who has the intellectual, emotional, and intuitive capacity to fulfill significant roles in the future within their communities. Now, we've heard things like that before with people saying that the extraterrestrials are, I guess, surveilling people, and possibly that could have something to do with implants as well, so some of those implants. But surveilling people to be able to establish who they can communicate with and who they can't or shouldn't, perhaps, okay? So, so Susie says the purpose of this type of using this consciousness technology is to be able to select those who can pass on information to other humans. Now, the Greys informed Susie that humans would be brought onto craft in an altered state of consciousness, implanted with information that they would not remember, but could be triggered to access it at a later time. Now, I find that fascinating because I've also been aware of the Tibetan Terma tradition, where spiritual teachers can implant information into their students' minds, which will be activated at a later date. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? I just wonder who those teachers actually were, or if they were being influenced somehow. The Greys informed Susie that humans would be brought onto craft in an altered state of consciousness, while the extraterrestrials said it was vital that they use humans to pass on information and warnings to other humans so they would be more receptive to what they were being told. I think it's quite likely that this information lodging, and let's call it for what it is, continues to be implanted in our dream states as well. So Susie's not alone in these experiences. During the 1990s, I received many reports from alien abductees who reported similar situations, sometimes in dreams, and other times they thought they'd actually been taken somewhere underground, which is what I said before, into a spaceship, or certainly an enclosure where various scenes were played out in different rooms, sometimes on screens, while at other times in holographic form. And the screens were always end-of-world situations, just like those experienced by Kevin Day and Susie Hansen. Witnesses often bounced the idea off me that they were shown these situations in their dreams or in reality, so they would act as a warning beacon for humanity to change course on a seemingly perilous path of no return. And while I think that's quite possible, I also think there may be more than one alien agenda at play here, although as yet I'm unsure about what that might be. Now, here's another case I'd like to talk about involving the Ohio National Guard on the 18th of October 1973 at 23:05 hours. And it demonstrates that authorities are well aware of the strange dreams reported by close encounter experiences. So this involved an Army helicopter assigned to the Cleveland USARF FAC, where they encountered a near mid-air collision with an unidentified flying object. And there were 4 crew members on board at the time when the incident occurred. There was the command pilot, who was Captain Lawrence Coyne. The co-pilot was Lieutenant Rick Jesse. The staff sergeant was John Healy, and another staff sergeant was Robert Janacek. Now, the Army helicopter was returning from Columbus in Cleveland to Cleveland in Ohio in the United States, and it was flying at an altitude of 2,500 feet. Anyway, Staff Sergeant Janacek, observed a red light on the east horizon 90 degrees to the flight path of the helicopter. Now, approximately 30 seconds later, Janacek indicated the object was converging on the helicopter at the same altitude and an airspeed in excess of 1,100 kilometers an hour, and it was on a mid-air collision heading. Now, Captain Coyne observed the converging object, took over the controls of the aircraft, and initiated a power descent from 2,500 feet to 1,700 feet to avoid having that collision with the object. But just as the collision appeared imminent, the light suddenly stopped and it hovered above and in front of the helicopter. And the crew saw a cigar-shaped grey metallic domed object whose apparent size filled the entire windshield. The object appeared solid. It was blotting out the stars behind it. It had a red light at the nose, a white light at the tail, and a distinctive green beam emanating from the lower part of the otherwise featureless fuselage. Now, the green beam swung up over the helicopter nose, through the windshield, so it's lighting up the people inside the cabin, and into the upper tinted window panels. So the cockpit's bathed this intense green light, but there's no noise, there's no turbulence, nothing like that. The UFO slowly continued on a westerly course, accelerating at a high rate of speed and disappearing to the northwest. Now, Captain Coyne reported the altimeter read as 3,500 feet, not lower as expected from a downward dive. And that's unusual in itself. And he then returned the aircraft to 2,500 feet and flew back to Cleveland, Ohio. Now, here is important to bring to your attention the intense green light that bathed the cockpit, because following this incident, Sergeant Healy dreamt that he left his body and his spirit was floating, looking down at his dead body laying in the bed. Now, on further recent investigations, it was discovered that the Surgeon General in the Surgeon General's department sent personnel to inquire about the crew's dreams. Now, the Surgeon General is head of the Commission Corps as a 6,500 member cadre of uniformed health professionals. In other words, the department comprises of military personnel with selected leaders of no less than admiral status dating back through its history. So I'm making a point of that so that you know the group that is aware of this and is investigating it. So here we have a UFO that shines a light on the crew of a helicopter that possibly triggers any number of events, including out-of-body states, that appear as a dream, and the military are investigating them. So this then begs the question as to why they are investigating these incidents if these memories are purely born in dreams. Do you think it's a good question? I do. Here's another image of the object and the beam of light. And the previous slide was showing that at the time there were people in a car underneath while all this was going on, witnessing it too. So let's talk about some of the work of Nick Redfern, what he's been writing about in relation to this subject. So Nick Redfern reports that over the decades he's collected many reports from people who have had nightmares, many linked to the UFO phenomenon, alien abductions, and to images shown to abductees by black-eyed greys. Some of you might have heard about those too. So in a 2017 article, he discusses a man by the name of Andy who had a dream of being in London with streets deserted. Now, Andy said the city was not destroyed or in flames, but empty, like the city had been evacuated, and not unlike many of the scenes of the cities deserted during the 2020 pandemic, mind you. So I'm just wondering, could Andy have experienced a precognitive dream there? Possible. Another case reported to Redfern involved Kenny, who had a horrific dream of nuclear war. And Kenny woke up suddenly in the dead of night in a state of terror. And Redfern explains that in his dream, he was sitting in the living room of a house, and Kenny heard a sudden and deep rumbling sound that seemed to be coming from somewhere far away. So he went to the screen door and he was a bit puzzled. He peered outside, didn't know what was going on. But to his horror, Kenny could see way off in the distance a huge nuclear mushroom cloud looming large and ominous on the horizon. Now remember, this is all in a dream, okay? So in the dream, he was rooted to the spot, his legs shaking and his heart pounding. And he could only stand and stare at the huge radioactive cloud extended to a height of what was clearly miles. So the entire sky turned black, and suddenly a huge wave of flame and smoke, hundreds of feet high, raced across the entire landscape, completely obliterating everything in its path. In seconds, there was another explosion, again way off in the distance, but from the opposite direction. And supposedly nuclear war had begun. And that was when Kenny woke up to find it was just a dream. But he was really disturbed by the feeling that it was more than a dream and that he had seen something from the future. Now, a lot of time, people who come forward and talk to me about their close encounters often report dreams that are so real that they don't feel that they are dreams. But there is something about them that leaves an impression on their psyche, a deep and disturbed impression on their psyche. So what has happened since then? Well, we've had the explosion in Beirut on the 4th of August 2020. Could that have been something that he was dreaming about? Some sort of apocalyptic dream or some sort of terrible disaster? It's a possibility. In that particular experience, there are 157 deaths, 5,000 injuries, 300,000 people left homeless, and 10 to 15 billion US dollars in property damage. Basically, it was a mess. But let's go on to Dr. John Mack, who did the UFO research community a great favour by bringing some degree of acceptability of the abduction phenomenon to the public. So in his book, which I've got here, Dr. John Mack states that scenes of the Earth devastated by nuclear holocaust, vast panoramas of lifeless polluted landscapes and waters, and apocalyptic images of giant earthquakes, firestorms, floods, and even fractures of the planet are shown by the aliens to abductees. Exactly what I've had reported to me through the 90s. These are powerfully disturbing to the abductees, who tend to experience them as literally predictive of the future of the planet. Some abductees are given an assignment in this future Holocaust, as it is displayed, to feed the survivors, or are told, as in the prophetic books of the Bible, that some will perish while others will be taken to another place to participate in the evolution of life in the universe. A theme that we've heard, since I can remember, in various segments of the UFO community. Now, in 1992, a man called Ed contacted Dr. Mack and told him of an experience he had as a teenager in 1961, when he and his friend Bob Baxter, along with Bob's parents, had taken a trip up the coast of Maine. And one night they stopped at a place where the shore was rocky somewhere north of Portland. And the Baxters stayed in a cabin while the boys slept in the car. Now, Ed believes he'd fallen asleep when the next thing he knows, he's out on a precipice and in a pod of some description that had some sort of glass bubble over it. He was naked in a small room with transparent curved walls, but he could still hear the pounding surf and hear the wind buffeting outside. So in the pod with Ed was a slight female figure with long, straight, thin, silvery blonde hair. And Ed found her attractive, he became sexually excited, and they actually did have sex. But afterwards, he had a sense that now they were going to get serious and down to business with a bigger agenda, which is why she was there. And she began imparting spiritual and cosmic information of import that opened Ed's consciousness and left the teenager dumbfounded. Could you imagine? As a teenager, that must have been strange, weird. So Ed told Mack that some of the information he was given concerned the way humans are conducting themselves here in terms of international politics, our environment, our violence to each other, our food, and all those types of things. Everything that basically that civilization is unhappy with. And she kept explaining the laws of the universe are this way, and it's like, if you're driving on the wrong side of the road, what's going to happen? Inevitably, you're going to crash. So he just sat there and he thought, well, oh my God, this was like trauma time, deep, anxious concern over the path I could see us humans taking, a world trauma. Ed was told of the heavily destructive path humans were taking, which was also destructive to the humanoids' planets, which again goes back to what the contactees of the 50s and 60s era were saying about the extraterrestrials telling us to stop exploding bombs, because it was not only having an effect on Earth, but going into the far reaches of space and affecting other planetary civilizations. Now, after this encounter, Ed felt his whole psyche had been permanently changed. The female told him that with his acquiescence, his emotions, cognitions, and perceptions would be modified, and that his style of functioning would be slightly different. So, subsequent to the encounter, Ed found himself making intuitive and somewhat impulsive statements on social, political, and scientific matters, fitting the pattern of close encounter experiences being part of a social subgroup called the influentials, identified in the Rope Report of 1992, who in that report are said to be the trendsetters rather than trend followers and highly critical of their society. That doesn't mean they have to be, big personalities or extremely well known, but they were considered like the committee members and letter writers and people who rang up and spoke about their opinions on talkback radio and all those sorts of things as well. So people who wanted to make a difference and who were speaking out wherever they could. So after Ed's initial meeting with Dr. Mack, he found himself increasingly troubled in the name of the future about eco-sustainability, or instability, I should say, and assaults upon the earth. And he decided to pursue more information about this, so he underwent a hypnosis session. And during this session, he recalled being shown apocalyptic images. And a being communicated messages to Ed of instability on the planet, emotional instability, with volcanic eruptions being a sign, and, quote, weeping at the stupidity of humans losing contact with the inner soul of their being, unquote. I don't know if we need an alien to tell us that, but there you go. Now, the female, who Ed now identified as Ojika or Ajika, told him that the earth is enraged by human stupidity, and the earth's skin would swat some bugs off that who do not know how to work in symbiotic harmony with it. Basically, getting rid of those people who weren't going on to help create a constructive future. Now, Ed remembered seeing distorted forms of entities and of spirits caused by the damage done by man. And this damage has been done to mankind and to Mother Nature. And he was shown grotesque forms that were dark, grey and malignant that were trying to heal or rebalance. It took a lot of effort of the healthy spirits to keep these malignant forms from growing in magnitude and malignancy. And while our Western mindset has no place for ideas of spirits, it does tie in with other warnings of how bombs not only affect our physical world, but also the realms of the unseen too. Now, during a trip to India in 1992, a small group of professionals, including John Mack, met with Tibetan leaders to discuss the abduction phenomenon. And Mack states that the lamas saw alien beings as spirits that have become upset with the invasion and destruction of the Earth's environment, which they inhabit as well. A Tibetan physician explained that as a result of our ignorance, material attachment and aggression manifested by the desecration of the planet, these spirits have become annoyed and irritated and are causing negative disturbances. A leading spiritual figure among the Tibetans also saw aliens as spirits that have become so troubled by human destruction of the realms they inhabit that they've been forced to come among us, seeking our compassion and transformation. Could that be true? I think anything's possible. I certainly do think that there is enough evidence for beings to populate unseen realms reported throughout history by many people from coming from many directions at that conclusion, I would say. So, when we're doing all these things to the planet, it's having an effect in the unseen realms as well. And I think that's really important to remember. And in shamanism, shamans certainly understand that completely, utterly, and fully, because they travel into the unseen realms and communicate with the unseen realms regularly, and that they know that what happens in the unseen realms has an effect and manifests in the physical world. And I've had experiences of that as well. So let's talk about these nightmares. There's no doubt that the current pandemic is the most recent disaster befallen humanity on a worldwide scale, causing heightened stress levels and nightmares. In a Finnish study published on October 2020 in Frontiers of Psychology, the study used an AI algorithm to identify common nouns that came up in more than 800 people's dream reports collected in the 6th week of lockdown in 2020 in Finland. The majority of respondents also reported an increase in stress during the pandemic, which was linked to sleep disturbances and nightmares. And in the Finnish study, women reported a greater increase in stress levels and more frequent nightmares during the pandemic, with a pronounced shift towards negative emotions, anxiety, and death in dreams compared to men. And I think I've got something here for that. There we go. So we can see here, there's been a high increase right here with shorter sleep duration. And I don't know anyone I spoke to in 2020 who said that they were sleeping well. There's an increase in prolonged sleep latency, increase in nightly awakenings, right? Increase in disturbed circadian rhythm, and increased nightmares. To cope with drastic changes and a new normal, which we've heard a lot, which is crucial though to surviving any disaster and ensuing trauma, dreams offer an opportunity to experience the little deaths, I guess you could call it, involved with such events. And by little deaths, I mean that things will never be the same in a big way, but in so many little ways too. The way we think, the way we feel, our identity in relation to, our environment, our work, the people that some people have lost relatives and friends, all those types of things. And some people have had to dig down and reinvent themselves, put it that way. So that's what I mean by little deaths. And so the dreams offer the opportunity to practice our coping mechanisms in a safe environment in our unconscious mind. And our dreams can regulate our emotions too during stressful events, which serve to protect our equilibrium and our ability to cope with change, like I said, big and little. This would be true in some cases of close encounters as we come to terms with our experiences, while we learn to cope with and integrate them, and particularly in cases where information is implanted in our unconscious mind to be accessed at a later time. Perhaps there's a long-term trickle effect that extraterrestrial visitors understand far more than we do. The next question then becomes, are the apocalyptic dreams of close encounter experiences accurate? Are dreams evidence of an apocalyptic future? Well, in another article by Nick Redfern, he discusses 2 cases of nightmares of alien abductees that did not come to pass. And the first case involves a couple from Birmingham who in 1980 reported to Redfern that they both dreamt of a nuclear attack on Birmingham on the same night, sometime in the 1970s. And Redfern states that, and I quote, "In their dream, the city was vaporized, the ground shook for days, the skies blackened for months, and familiar landmarks and buildings blasted and disappeared. However, those landmarks had already been pulled down to make way for new developments, so their apocalyptic dream could not be real." The second case involved a woman from Texas who reported to Redfern in 2005 her dream of a destructive Third World War, which would occur in 2008. And Redfern writes, "The woman, her husband, her 1 kid, and her disabled mother were caught up in a massive traffic jam on the highway, as thousands of people tried, but completely failed, to flee the area. The nightmare ended with a huge explosion several miles ahead, and the appearance of a miles-high mushroom cloud and a gigantic wall of flame that raced along the landscape, killing everyone trapped in their quickly melted vehicles. But as with the story from Birmingham, there is a problem. The woman's elderly mother died suddenly in 2007, which was 1 year before the dreamed events were supposed to occur in 2008. So again, someone had an apocalyptic dream, but it didn't come true. Or at least aspects of it weren't real, put it that way. Like many of the abductees who reported similar experiences to me over the decades, their prophetic dreams and apocalyptic nightmares have to this day not come true in the way that they thought that they would. They still feel they have a role to play in some future disaster, even if they frustratingly don't know what that role is. And hey, let's face it, we haven't finished living yet. The world is going to go on after we all leave, and who knows how far into the future some of these apocalyptic dreams might relate. After all, we have Nostradamus, who talked about things that were happening in our lifetime. So yeah, we just really don't know, do we? So the question is, are aliens really passing on information about future disastrous events, warning us to prepare? Are experiences meant to act as warning beacons for our civilization? Is the collective unconscious of humanity tuning into the fact that we've entered a perilous time in our history, and this is somehow manifesting in apocalyptic dreams? Well, after all that, I have to say, to be honest, I have no clue. I don't know anyone who does. But what I do know is that humanity's future is unwritten. We have choices to make for a better future, and we have to keep improving on those choices if we're ever going to become cosmic citizens and take up residence in our greater galactic neighbourhood. Thanks for listening.